Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Heller, CEO of CHAPA. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to all of the sponsors who provide CHAPA with the support we need to advocate for opportunity, expand access to housing, and to develop the affordable housing and community development field. In particular, I'd like to thank TD Bank, who sponsored today's event and made today's event possible. And I'd like to thank Mass Housing, MHP, Health Resources in Action, the Boston Foundation, Oak Foundation, and JP Morgan Chase for their support for our municipal engagement team, who's responsible for putting today's event together. And I'd like to thank our municipal engagement team, Dana Lewinter, Whitney Demetrius, and Lily Link. I want to thank you for the passion that you have brought to this event and really for all of the work that you do every day in communities across the state. And at CHAPA, we very much work as a team, and our whole team is here today. So thank you to the entire CHAPA team. Today, we have a truly amazing group of panelists and honorees who are going to talk about different approaches to ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to have safe, healthy, affordable homes in the communities that they choose and opportunities to prosper and thrive. To make that vision a reality, we will all need to learn from each other, we'll need to work in our own communities, and we'll need to work together for broader systemic changes. The Fair Housing Act is now more than 50 years old, and it puts forward such a powerful belief that every person should be able to live their lives free of discrimination, that it continues to put fear in the hearts of people who've benefited from discriminatory housing policies. We heard it loud and clear from the Trump administration with their outright attacks on the Fair Housing Act, threatening that the act would abolish the suburbs, and former HUD Secretary Ben Carson saying that affirmatively furthering fair housing regulations was a waste of time for municipalities to comply with. We know that the Trump administration was amplifying a reality that we all see every day, a reality we see in public meetings when people use coded language and complain that affordable housing will bring crime, traffic for children, adding costs to our schools. A reality we see when people using rental assistance are discriminated against and told that a rental home isn't available when in fact still is. And we all probably have our own stories, whether they're personal or we've heard it from people that we know. For me, I grew up in a family that struggled to make ends meet. We were renters, and I lived in at least 5 or 6 different homes that I can remember in 4 or 5 different communities by the time that I graduated from high school. The most stressful days for me as a kid were the days when we were interviewed for a new home or the days when the landlord came to inspect. As kids, my brothers and I knew that we were being judged and one wrong move could cost our family our home. We all know that housing and development decisions are made every day based on a person's skin color, their use of rental assistance, having a disability, their gender, their religion, sexual orientation, or where they're from. There's outright discrimination that individuals face every day. And there are the systemic policies that separate us by race and income. As we reckon with racial disparities in health, income, housing, and one's ability to walk down the street without being harassed or having the police called, we must own that these are the direct results of intentional and systemic decisions that have been made for centuries, that are rooted in racism and classism. And these decisions affect every aspect of life: healthcare, education, economic opportunity, housing, quality of life, and more. So how does this become a moment for us to collectively recognize the role that zoning and access to housing play in systemic racism? Zoning is the tool our communities use to determine what can and cannot be built, and that translates into who can or cannot have the opportunity to live there. In Massachusetts in 1969, we adopted Chapter 40B to open access to communities by providing a mechanism for building affordable housing when communities didn't allow for it themselves. And while this powerful law has produced more than 70,000 homes in Massachusetts, we still have work to do. We know that zoning is historically rooted in segregation and shaped by redlining, and that the effects of decades of lost wealth building for Black and brown households persist today, leaving many communities out of reach for households of color and putting many households at risk of displacement. The reality is, though, we can change this. Massachusetts has a long history and commitment to affordable housing and expanding housing opportunities, whether this is through our state rental assistance programs, our state public housing, capital budget investments, or new laws recently passed that will make it easier to put zoning in place that we need to expand housing opportunities. And CHAPA is committed to this work. As a staff team, we developed an equity and access framework. In that framework, we acknowledge that disparities in access and equity are the direct and indirect results of intentional and systemic decisions. And to ensure equity and access, we must be intentional in our approach. We aim to ensure that those who are impacted by the lack of affordable housing have access and space to contribute, and that their knowledge, expertise, and lived experience is valued and applied equally with policymakers and people who work in the affordable housing and community development field. We aim to impact and influence structural and systemic policies at every level of government, local, state, and federal, while applying equity principles through our various programs. Under the leadership of our new Fair Housing Engagement Director, Whitney Demetrius, who we're so fortunate to have on our team, CHAPA will be looking internally at our work and determining how we can work across our programs to further fair housing. And we'll bring people together across the state through our new Fair Housing Committee. This will be a place for people to learn from each other and align strategies to remove barriers and increase opportunities for people to have safe, healthy, affordable homes in the communities they choose. And we're committed to ensuring access to affordable housing. CHAPA is working with Housing Navigator Massachusetts to develop a new, simplified, user-focused affordable housing search tool. This new website will help renters and property owners to connect. It will be the most comprehensive inventory of affordable housing across Massachusetts. And it will provide an opportunity to help people find homes in the communities where they want to live, as well as a resource to inform policy. Today, we're going to learn from an incredible group of people who are working through various approaches to level the playing field and ensure opportunity for all. Today's symposium will celebrate the work of fair housing advocates who are working in different ways to ensure access and opportunity. In addition, we'll hear from panels who will talk about why we need to do this work, what can be done at the federal level, and approaches to closing the Black homeownership gap and creating generational wealth. I now turn it over to Whitney Demetrius, CHAPA's Director of Fair Housing Engagement, for our first panel, The Why Before the How.
Thank you so very much, Rachel, for that introduction and for really laying the framework for our event and for our conversations today. It's really a pleasure to work alongside you in this work, and I'm really excited to sort of jump into our conversation. And so, as she mentioned, our first panel is the why before the how, and I'd like to invite our two panelists to join me in this conversation, which I'm really excited. We have Andrew DeFranza, Executive Director from Harbor Light Community Partners, and Bob Terrell, who's a member of our CHAPA Fair Housing Committee, and also a member of the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Community Advisory Committee that's also going to be honored today for their work. So I invite you to unmute yourselves and join me as we hope to sort of also pin us so that others can see us on screen and begin our conversation. So thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for having us, Whit.
Of course, of course. Really, it's my pleasure because I'm really, really excited about this conversation, and I'd love to really just jump right in. Question I'd love to sort of start us with is really, as we center ourselves in today's conversation, we're making an appeal, right, to hearts as we continue to acknowledge that fair housing is a civil rights issue at its core. Why is it important then, maybe more so than ever, that we really focus and center our work in the why before the how? Andrew, did you want to jump in and start us off?
Sure, and it's delightful to be here with you all and share the Zoom boxes with Whitney and Bob. It's an honor and nice to see everybody and be seen. So I think partially what I would say, at least as a jumping off point, is in a situation like this where the stakes are so incredibly high, and the work is hard and long, right? We're in a moment in time where we've been handed a set of responsibilities from those who went before us. As Rachel cited, the Fair Housing Act, and we're doing our part during our shift for those who are going to come after us. And that's critical work at a broad level, almost a spiritual, ethical level. It's elevated work in that way. And so I think for the kind of hard this is, the kind of change that we're looking to make, it is important that we are rooted, all of us, in the reasons